Okay. All right, so I'll just introduce myself real fast, and then we'll go in, and I'll let Chris know. So I'm Dallin Cowles. I work downstairs in the Registrars office. I'm the academic coordinator, so I handle the Advising Basics training and the FERPA, which we'll talk about in a second. And yeah, so we'll just go ahead. Okay. So the Registrar's office, like I said, we're located downstairs. We have a few divisions, and we'll go through each of them. Give you a good overview of what our office does and the different functions that we help you with as advisors and how you are able to help students. The best resource for us is our office website. We really like how this got changed over a couple years ago. It has all of our information, so all of our forms, the calendars, the policy and procedures, the student handbook, and graduation information is on there. We try to keep dates and deadlines that are coming up on the homepage, and also anything that's new. If we're going to be closed or when grad apps are due, that's always a really good thing for students to know. So this is a great resource for you, registrar.utah.edu. So feel free to use it and abuse it. Like I said, the calendars are on there. Pretty much any academic date that you need to help students plan out their semesters is going to be on there. So dropping classes, adding classes, spring break, fall break, when grades are due, anything like that is going to be available on these calendars. And we usually have those out about 5 semesters, so we'd like to give you a good sense of what's going to be happening for the next couple of years. Okay. We have registration tutorials on our website. These are like a video type. It shows you screenshots of what the student will see when they are registering. And those are available. I'm not going to go through the whole registration process in this presentation, but those are available on the website, and also it kind of lays it out in your binders that you received. But they're available on the registration and records page, and this is a little different now. It says it's under the how-to, but you'll be able to see that it says how-to tutorials. So all of those are available. They're a great resource. We wanted to get those out so people could see what the student is seeing while registering, and so I think we've had some good success with that. Everything that we do with the registration process is done through Campus Information Services. So whenever a student needs to see the registration date, registration is actually going to start for summer next week, and so students were able to go in and see when their appointment was set. An appointment is not when they don't go meet with anybody. It's when they're actually able to log in and register for classes. So they'll be able to do that. They can see the class schedule. They'll be able to drop and add classes, view their grades. All of those different things are available in the Campus Information Services. And you can get to that from the homepage. This is an old screenshot, but just the icon, the CIS icon. So. Like I said, everything in registration is done on the student tab. Most students will probably only have a student tab once they log into Campus Information Services. And in the registration pagelet, the one that's outlined there, is where they will go to add a class, drop a class. And once they're in the registration, if they go into add, they can also get to a different area to say, I want to drop a class. Once they're in, they're in. So it's kind of nice. It's all in one place. Okay, registration appointments, kind of talked about this, so it's not actually sitting down. They don't need to come to our office and sit with anybody. They're able to log into CIS, and they can see when their appointment is by clicking on View Your Registration Date. We send reminder emails to students about this a few weeks. I think we sent it a few weeks ago, so they're able to go in. And the nice thing about the new registration process is that students are able to go in and build their schedules beforehand. They created what's called a shopping cart. It's like any other online shopping. They're able to go in, look at the courses, and from there they can build their schedules. And so that doesn't mean they're in the class, but it means that they can kind of get a sense of where they're going to be. And they can do that once they have seen their appointment. So if they want to see their appointment, they go in, they can choose the correct term, and they need to make sure they choose the correct career. So a lot of students will have a non-credit, they'll have an undergrad, maybe a graduate, depending on when they attended. So they just need to make sure they choose the correct one, and then they can go in, and it will show them a screen, and will show them their date that they're actually able to go in and register. and the number of units that they're allowed to sign up for before open enrollment. So it's a really good resource for students to know what their semester is going to look like and when they can actually start planning that semester. Okay, if they want to add classes, like I say, put them in their shopping cart. If they're before their appointment, they can do that by clicking on Add Classes. So once a student wants to register for a course, they have 14 calendar days to add a class. So once the term begins, there's 14 calendar days for them to add. And in the second week, so the week that classes start, that next Monday, they're going to need a permission code to get into a class. And so they can kind of maintain who's in classes and if they're full or whatnot. They get a permission code from the department or the instructor. And like I say, the adding class instructions is included in your binder and again on those tutorials. So these are just kind of the dates, important dates that students need to be aware of when they want to add a class. If they need to add a class before the census date, they need to get a green late add form. This is picked up in person in our office downstairs at window 13 at the registration window. They need to have the instructor's signature in order to get into the class. And so this is after that second week and before the census deadline. So the census deadline is the 15th business day, the 15th day of class. So it's a little tricky because you have 14 calendar days to add and then you have 15 business days before we hit census. And so you have to keep them straight. It's a little tricky. But they come and get this from our office, have the instructor sign it, bring it back to our office, and we manually register the student for the course. Okay. If they're after the census date, there's a fee involved, and we need to have a few signatures. So they need to have the instructor's signature, the department signature, and the college dean signature. So if a student really wants to be in a class, you're going to have to get some signatures to do this. There's a little bit of legwork on their part. There's also a $50 late add fee per class. So the students really want to be in that class if they're going to pay that. So the reason there's a fee is because after the census, we send our census numbers to the state legislature, and that's what our funding is based on. And so if students are adding after that, that's how they kind of make up that difference. So encourage your students to register early, and so they don't have to do this, and also get all those signatures. So, but again, this form, again, you get it from our office. You take it, get the signatures, bring it back, and the student is manually registered for the course. Okay, another option with registering is electing the credit, no credit option. And students are able to do this, again, the 14th calendar day. Once the term starts, that's the deadline. They have to elect it. They can revoke that the Friday before the class ends. So they have some time. They'll sit in the class. If they choose to say, I want to take this credit, no credit, they're able to do that. And then if they figure out that they either A, need to get a grade because it's for their major, which is a lot of times the case, or B, they're doing pretty well in the class and they're like, oh, I'm probably going to get a B or so. I'm going to revoke that credit, no credit. So they can do that up until the Friday before the class ends. So yeah, so they have some time to figure out. A lot of times they realize they do need the class with a grade, and so they'll change that. There is a limit on it though, of 15 credits, and once you've used that, once you've elected it, those credits are gone. So even if they change it back, they take a 3-credit class. Out of that 15, now they're down to 12, whether they did credit, no credit, or not. So be aware of that when you're helping your students. Tell them to be pretty prudent on using this because they go really quick. I mean, technically, it could be about 5 classes that they could do that for. So another warning with that is when we send a transcript, it will say CR next to for the grade or NC. That can be misinterpreted by schools. They might think it's like a C grade, just kind of like things that we've seen. So it's if they don't need to take a credit, no credit, encourage them to take it for a grade. But if they want to, they can. That's always an option for them. Again, they do that with the edit class, variable hours, and credit, no credit option. That's where that link is for them to go in and change that. And again, those instructions are in the binder and on the how-to tutorials. So that's one thing that they can do. Dropping a class. So when a student wants to drop a class, they have 10 calendar days to do that. So this means the class is deleted from the student's record. It's not going to show up. If they do it after, they'll get a W, and the class will stay on. We'll talk about that in a second. But They can do this on the web. And the nice thing with the new registration system that we have is students are able to add all of their classes at once, but they can also drop all of their classes at once. They don't have to go in and do it individually. So that's a nice feature that we have. Again, it's in the registration pagelet under drop class, and they're able to do that. So pretty simple. Again, that comes up really quick. Classes usually start on Monday, and by the following Wednesday is when they have to drop those classes. So it comes really, really quickly. If they don't drop it on the 10th day and they do it the 11th day, they get a W on their record, meaning withdrawn. And so they're able to do that so they can start on the 11th day. Up until the midpoint of the class, they're able to withdraw from the class. After that, they'll have to do what's called a dean's withdrawal. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But as far as tuition, a lot of times students will have questions about that. Between the add deadline and the drop deadline, so the drop comes first, and about 4 days later is the add. Tuition is refunded. After that, they have to do a petition through the tuition office to see if they're going to get any of their tuition refunded. But that's handled separately. It's handled through them, not through our office. Because after the add deadline, they're going to be responsible for the full tuition. So if students are looking to either drop a class or withdraw, encourage them to do that early if they don't want to get stuck with a huge tuition bill for a class that they're not going to take. So miscellaneous classes. These are any classes that have weird kind of patterns. So it's like a field trip, a lot of the PRT, S or L or W classes, they're a lot of times they're a field trip. They maybe only meet once for the whole semester, once or twice, things like that. They have very different deadlines. They're adding, they're dropping, electing credit, no credit. Pretty much they can't do any online changes on or after the first day of class. They need to contact our office. They either need to send us an email, they need to call us, they need to come in person for us to do anything with that class. So if they're taking anything like that, just have them contact us and let them know that those deadlines pass really quick. So because they don't follow the same pattern, they're not the 10 calendar days or the 14 calendar days. So just have them contact us as soon as possible. And then the drop deadlines are in the student handbook, which is available online. So those are kind of some different courses that are offered here, so to be aware of. Okay, so that's kind of registration. Another division in our office is the graduation division. We want students to graduate. We want them to eventually leave the university with a diploma. So, but there's a couple of things they have to do before that. So they need to come to our office or go online and print off the form. So there's a graduation application. This form has been updated a little bit, but the pertinent information is on here. So you as an advisor, when the student comes to you and has a graduation application, there's a few things that you as an advisor need to do. You need to make sure that the student is declared a full major. You need to complete the advisor endorsement down at the bottom there and verify the catalog year. So catalog year is key because the DARS is what we use to clear students. If their DARS is off, they're not going to graduate. And so the catalog year is really important. And so the catalog year is when the student declared the major. And so they may have been a student starting in 2010, but didn't declare until 2012. We're going to use the 2012-2013 catalog year for their requirements. Okay, so it's really, really important that you verify the catalog year and make sure that it's the correct one.
How do you know that's when they declare it?
It should be in PeopleSoft, in Campus Information Services. If you don't know, call our office for sure, because we will be able to look it up and tell you. But yeah, if you don't know the catalog year, for sure, just either find it or find us, and we will be able to tell you. Yeah, because that's clear, or that's key. When they're running the DARS, they have to make sure they run the correct one, or otherwise the student isn't completing the correct requirements, and they might not graduate, which would be really unfortunate. So a couple of deadlines. So when students want to apply to graduate for fall, which is in December, that's due by June 1st. For spring, it's due November 1st, and summer, it's due February 1st. Encourage your students to kind of get them in a little bit early if you can. After those deadlines, there is a fee of $25. So if they don't want to pay that, tell them to bring it in a little bit early. There's usually a line on those days, so yeah. But that's pretty much what they need to do for the grad app. Pretty simple, but there's different reports that you're able to run as an advisor. You need to have security access to do this, and you do that by taking the FERPA tutorial and then filling out the form and submitting it to our office. One that we have is the graduation candidates by major, and this is done through CIS under the academic reports, and once you have access to this, you'll be able to see it. But this basically just shows you can run a report based on the major. So if I'm doing accounting, if I'm the advisor for accounting, I want to see all the accounting majors, and I want to do, I can choose to do the BA, the BS, or all of them, either way. You can select a status, so applied, awarded, denied. You can see all the students that fit into this category by generating this report. And it's just really helpful. You can kind of see if people have minors, if there's any emphases that the students have with their majors. You can also see with this one that we ran, all of these students were applied. They hadn't been evaluated just yet, but we knew their status based on that. So this is a great tool for you as advisors. It helps you know who, kind of keep track of your students. And so if you have any questions about this, graduation is probably the best people to contact about it. But and if you don't have access, contact them and they can get you set up. So by taking the FERPA and sending in that form. But it's just a really nice way to see where your students are. So I don't know if this is in the binder for sure, but if it's not, I'll send it to Steve and he can forward it. This just basically goes through the whole application process from students getting the form to a degree conferred. So just all of the evaluations that take place and anything that the advisors need to do, such as entering exceptions and things like that. So if that's not there, I will forward that and get it to you. But it's a nice way to kind of see how it flows for you from going from red to green. And so, okay, petitions. These are handled in our office. This is when a student needs to have an exception made or wants an exception made, either way. These are available. The student can come pick up the form in the office, or it's available online. And what they will need to do is provide some more documentation with this, which we'll talk about. So basically, this is when a student maybe had something happen, a life-altering experience, or something in a semester didn't do so well, and is looking for an exception. So we'll talk about that. Okay. The petitions that we handle in the office, retroactive withdrawals. If a student wants to delete classes with a W, meaning they withdrew after the drop deadline. The credit, no credit option, they want to elect it or revoke it. Sometimes, like I say, they need a class for their major, so they need to revoke that. They didn't realize it at the time, things like that. If they need to add a class, credit hour changes, and section changes. So those are kind of the things that the petition is able to employ. Things that we don't do then with the petition. So a current term, a withdrawal after the deadline. So remember, they have until the midpoint to withdraw from a class. If they want to withdraw after that, they have to do what's called a dean's withdrawal, and they have to do that through their college, the major. So if they're like a math major, they go through the College of Science, and that's handled through the dean's office. If they would like to withdraw after the deadline, they either have to do the dean's withdrawal or they just have to wait. And a lot of times the student will fail the course or get an EU, and then they'll do a retroactive with us. So those are kind of their options. It's probably, I would encourage students to do the dean's withdrawal, to be honest, just so that it's like taken care of. So we don't handle tuition reimbursement. We kind of talked about that earlier. That's handled through income accounting, the tuition office downstairs in the first floor of this building. And we don't do an audit after the midpoint or a retroactive audit. That's grade manipulation, so that's why that's not done. If a student wants to audit a class, they have until the 14th calendar day to elect that or to sign up as an audit. So those are things that the petitions won't do. Like I said, they need some documentation with that. A lot of times the student needs to provide a statement of why the student needs an exception. This happened in my life, I had some medical issues, whatever the case may be, they need to provide that documentation, and they can be as detailed as they would like. They can do whatever they feel they want to share. But the more detailed they are, the better chance the committee has to really evaluate it. They need support documentation from the dean of their college or their committee chair, and that can be support or non-support. It just depends. Sometimes, every once in a while, you'll see someone that will write and say, I don't really support this. Or they will say, I support the student's petition. And that's submitted to the committee. Additional documentation, for instance, from a doctor, from an instructor, police reports a lot of times will come in, things like that. Just anything that helps the student plead his case will be helpful. There is a deadline with petitions. It needs to be done before graduation or within 3 years of the affected term, whichever comes first. So if I graduate, but I had a class that was like last year, but I've already graduated, too bad. That semester is going to stay on there. So students need to be aware that there is a timeline with that, and that they need to get that taken care of as soon as possible before they graduate or within those 3 years of the affected term. So, okay. Some additional divisions in our office, transcripts. These are transcripts that are University of Utah transcripts. So admissions receives transcripts, our office sends. So anytime a student is looking to transfer to another school or for a job, an internship, anything like that, verification of their degree, a lot of times they can send a transcript. Our office will handle that. They can come to the window. They're a little expensive. They're $15 at the window per transcript if they want it right then. We encourage students to order those online, and they're like $7.25. So if they're willing to wait another day or two, that's the better option, is to do it online. And that way we have a better record as well in our office, so we know which orders have been processed and things like that. So that's kind of a thing to be aware of with the students, because they are a little expensive. Unofficial transcripts for any students that have attended from 1998 on, they're able to go on to CIS and create or generate an unofficial transcript. So that's a nice thing. Sometimes they just need to know what their classes are. They don't need an official one. So the other area is veteran services. We have a lot of students who are coming back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're going to go to school. They want to use their GI Bill. Our office handles that. They're not downstairs. They used to be. They moved their office. They are over with the Veteran Support Center over in the Union Building in room 418. So if you have any students who are veteran students, send them over that way. But basically, they get them set up to use their benefits so they can go to school. And they certify their courses and send it over to Oklahoma so that students are able to get paid and for the courses so they can pay their tuition. But that's a great resource that we provide, and that population is definitely growing on our campus. So if you have students that are needing to use their GI Bill, send them over there, and they'll be happy to help them out. Okay, so that's kind of the registrar's office in a nutshell. I'm sure you guys will see some more at the summit, but any questions that you have with that? Yeah.
That petition process for students, how do the students get notified of the decision?
Oh, okay.
Is there a process?
Yeah, so once they submit all of their paperwork and everything, the committee usually meets once a week on Fridays, and then they are sent an email with a letter form from the associate registrar stating that it was denied or it was partially approved or approved. If it is denied and they would like to continue, they really want that to happen, it goes to a separate committee over in the Park building with I'm the associate vice president for enrollment management. She heads that committee. And so, but they get an email from us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so the second part of the presentation is FERPA, and I'm sure are you guys familiar with FERPA? Okay, good. So we're just going to go over some key things here because we all work for the university, and it's an important part of the university and protecting students. So FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974, and they are housed in the Department of Education back in Washington, D.C. So this is a federal law, and we are subject to it because we receive federal funding from the Department of Education. So the essence of the act, basically, college students are permitted to inspect their education records. We, as school officials, may not disclose personally identifiable information to third parties. We need to have written consent to do that. There's a few ways that we can get around that legally, but basically we have to be careful on who we are giving information to and for what purpose. So personally identifiable is anything that can be traced directly to a student. So we each have a name. That's us, right? I'm Dallin, Lamb, Paul, Patricia, Steve. Okay, that's personally identifiable. So that's one thing. Basically, addresses, social security numbers, student numbers, characteristics about a student. So these are anything that can be tied back to a student directly. And it gets a little tricky, and we'll talk about this because personally identifiable sometimes falls within information that we're able to release. So we'll talk about that, but it does get a little bit tricky, so you have to be pretty prudent. Education records. So our institution maintains education records downstairs. We have a student record for each student. So we maintain that. It's tied directly to one student, so it's personally identifiable, and it's not an excluded category, which we'll talk about. So these are what is considered an education record, and it's subject to FERPA, meaning we can't just release it. We have to make sure that we're giving it to the people who need it for a certain purpose. Okay. Education records don't include sole possession notes, and these are, so for instance, a sole possession note is when, if you're meeting with a student and you just kind of need a memory aid, for instance, saying, okay, I met with Johnny and, he mentioned this, about, so you can remember who he is, but it's not part of the record. The thing with a sole possession note that you need to remember is that it needs to be kind of like locked up. No one else can have access to it, and it needs to be just something that you use. It's not stating grades, it's not stating anything to do with like the education of the student, but just a memory aid for you. So sole possession notes are only accessible to the person that makes them. Law enforcement unit records, employment records, doctor-patient privilege records, and alumni records. These are all things that are not considered education records, so they're not subject to FERPA. If someone calls the university and wants these, they could probably get them as long as they had the correct documentation, but they're not subject to FERPA. None of these are. Oh, I always do this. I always skip this one. So, sole possession notes, something that you keep privately as an advisor. I guess the note on this one is the advisor notes in PeopleSoft. Those are not sole possession notes. Other people have access to those. So just as you're making those notes, just realize that if someone were to ask for that, like if the student were to ask for any advisor notes, those would need to be released to the student. So they're subject to FERPA. So just be aware of that. Like I say, other people could have access to them. So, okay. Admission records. There's always that kind of gray area when a student is admitted in like March and then they don't start until August. So there's this whole summer when they're admitted, but they haven't taken any classes yet. They're not really signed up yet. The best rule of thumb is to say we just don't have information. If someone calls you and says, I need information about this student, it's best, in my opinion, and kind of just a good rule of thumb is to say we don't have any information to release about that person at this time, because the FERPA rights are going to begin when a student takes a class and actually sits in a class. So it's not that we don't have the information because the student technically is admitted, but we really shouldn't release anything at that point. So just kind of a good thing to know. Okay. So disclosure of directory information. So this is where I said it gets a little bit tricky. So directory information is things that we're able to release. So we don't need written consent to release things, provided that we tell the students what is considered directory information, and that's available on our website. And I also have a bookmark that I'll hand out to you that lists everything that's considered directory information here at the University of Utah. It might not be the same as like Weber State or Utah State, BYU. They might have different things. Okay, and also we need to make sure that students are given the opportunity to refuse the disclosure of directory information, and we do that. They are able to do that through our office, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but we let them know the beginning of each school year, the process for that. We send out a message on the Student Message Center on the Campus Information Services. So as long as we do these two things, we are able to release information without written consent, the directory information. Okay, and like I said, this is the list of everything that's considered directory information here at the University of Utah. Like I say, this is where it gets tricky because you have a student name, an address, phone number, even the student ID is considered directory information here, but that's also personally identifiable. So you need to make sure that you're being prudent on what you're releasing and to whom. So just to kind of keep that in mind. And like I say, this bookmark has all of that information. I'll hand that out to you. Students who don't want anything released put what's called a FERPA restriction on the record. So that little window shade icon, when you pull it up in PeopleSoft, it will show up on their service indicators. And that means if someone calls you and wants information, even if it's the student, you say no. You're just like, I can't release anything about that person. I don't have any information about that person, whatever the case is. So basically, if the student comes in with a picture ID, fine, you can release information to the student, and you have to have a signed release if it's someone else. So if a parent were to come in or someone, as long as you have a signed release stating that it can be released to that person and this information, that's fine. But that's how you get around the FERPA restriction, but just making sure that we have permission to release information. School officials. So a school official is defined as someone. So we're employed by the university in administrative, supervisory, academic, research, or support staff, or a member of the Board of Trustees or the Utah State Board of Regents, or any person that's under contract or employed by or to the university to perform a special task. So attorneys, auditors, collection agencies, something like that, to assist with the university's educational mission. So these are people who are all considered school officials, and so we are all employed by the university. We're school officials. So if someone were to call us and need something, technically we could release that to them based on our position. However, in order to release that, the person needs to have what's called a legitimate educational interest. So basically, someone needs to review an education record to fulfill a professional responsibility. So a lot of times people call our office, for instance, and they want like unofficial transcripts for their whole department. And so as long as we know that they're not going to release those to anyone else and they're just using them for advising purposes, we will do that. We have a form they fill out and they have it signed, but that's a legitimate educational interest. So you kind of have to dig a little bit if people are asking you for information, figure out why they need it, what for, and what they're going to do with it. And you could probably help them out. But just making sure that they have that legitimate educational interest is really important. Okay. Disclosure without consent. So we're able to disclose education records without written consent. Like I say, with the school officials determining a legitimate educational interest. And then also, and I don't know, we get these in our office. I don't know how across campus they are, but with any type of judicially order or lawfully issued subpoena. So we get these in our office every once in a while, and we make sure that we let the student know we're going to comply. If the student says no, then we don't comply. But if not, we will go ahead and send over. A lot of times they want their records for court proceedings and things like that. So that's kind of the way that we don't need consent. Because if the student doesn't respond to saying, hey, we have a subpoena, we're going to send your information, if they don't respond, we can go ahead and send it because we have to comply with the subpoena. So anyway, I don't know how often other offices see that. I would imagine not very often, but just kind of one of the caveats. Okay, peer advisors. Do you guys have peer advisors in your departments or Yeah, you do. Okay. So they're still, they are just like any other school official. They have to adhere to the FERPA policies, and they're permitted to access their records if they need them. So a lot of times, sometimes peer advisors are advising students, and so they need to have access to those types of records. So they're the same. They're considered school officials. Again, if they need information, they need to have a legitimate educational interest and things like that. So just to be aware of if you have those in your office. Parents are interesting. They're fun. Parents are considered a third party. It's kind of like a negative connotation, but they are. Because once the student either turns the age of 18 or begins attending here at the university, so if you got a student that's 15, the FERPA rights belong to that student. So just to be aware, because a lot of times parents have a lot of control up until the student is 18. So, but in the education world, it's a little bit different. So the FERPA rights belong to the student. Parents may obtain non-directory information. So if they want like grades, a class schedule, even like tuition or anything like that, they need to have like a signed consent. Or if we feel that we could release it, we can. We don't do that very often. Hardly ever. They need a signed consent. They can do the online consent to release, which we'll talk about in a second. But that's kind of like the way that it works for parents. And a lot of times they'll call and they're a little stubborn sometimes because, like I say, they've had a lot of control. And so it's kind of a learning curve for both the student and the parent. So just to be aware of. Another option, if a parent has what's called a power of attorney, and it specifically states educational records, that's a way that they can get information about a student or their student without consent. So we don't see those too often, but it is a way that they can do it. We don't really advertise it, but if they have one, we comply. So just to be aware of. Like I said, with parents, sometimes they'll call, they need information, they want information. The signed release is the best form for them to get information, or the online consent. A big thing right now is the leave of absence, because a lot of people are leaving to do LDS missions, or they're going to the Peace Corps, or whatever the case may be. They're going to be gone from the university. If the student files a leave of absence, they need to kind of like take care of those things with their parents. So their parents have either access, or they're able to help them while they're gone or right before they come home. That's a big thing that we see in our office. So if you know that students are going to be leaving and filing a leave of absence with our office, encourage them to really get their ducks in a row with their parents or their guardians or whomever, so that when they come back or the parent wants to help get the student signed up for classes, that they're able to do that. So just kind of a good thing to know. And we're seeing a lot more of those just because, especially with the missionary age, more and more people are leaving. So, and then they're coming back. But, and always we just encourage parents to talk with their children, not go through us for every little thing. If they, we're happy to comply if they go through the right avenues. But, just that having an open line of communication with their children, it's a lot easier for them. Okay. A signed release basically needs to include 4 things. It needs to include the records that are going to be released, that need to be released, the purpose. A lot of times in our office, students are on their parents' insurance, and they need to submit like their grades for a semester. So that would be like specifying, the purpose and what needs to be released. You need to identify the party or parties to whom disclosure may be made, so either that company or to a person in that company, something like that. And it needs to be signed and dated by the student. One thing with this is that we do this is a one-time request for us. If the student comes back the next day and needs the same thing, they're going to do another request. So that's how we handle it in our office, at least. So we keep them on file for a year, but it's a one and done type thing for us. So we really encourage the students, and I know orientation does this quite a bit too, to do it online. And so students are able to set this up on their student tab. And in the finance box, it's called the FERPA release consent. And they're able to click on that and they can set this up. And so they can check those 4 boxes. They can check all of them or one of them doesn't matter, whatever they want to do. And they create a pin. The student creates a pin and also creates a list. So on this one, John Doe is the student's father, and that's the email address. So if John Doe calls in and says, I need information about Jack, his son, you're able to kind of release information as long as you're checked up there. So where you're all advisors, that third one, it's the Utah Academic Advising, so university, college, or departmental. You'd want to make sure that one's checked so that you would be able to talk with that person that's listed there, and you would verify who the person is. A lot of times we don't encourage it over the phone too much. You can release some things if you feel like it's okay. Like I say, use your judgment on that. But that's kind of a way that students don't have to do a signed release every single time. So the person will call in and say, I need information about this student. I have a PIN. The PIN should be the trigger word that you need to look here to see if you're able to release information to that person. If you have any questions about that, or you don't know where it is or need access to it, please call our office and we'll get you set up for that. But that's a really great way for students to be able to, have information released without having to fax or email in every single time with a signed release. So just kind of a convenience factor. So that's about it. So any questions that you have, feel free to email us, call us. If you need to take the FERPA review, that's available on our website on the faculty and staff page. And do you have any other questions about FERPA? I feel like it's fairly cut and dry. So, okay, well that is all we have.